Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks for the Here's What Happened podcast. I am your host, Carolyn Hines, and today I am joined by writer and director Virginia Abramovich to discuss her first feature film, Between Waves. It's a mind-bending sci-fi about love, loss, and water, and how all of these things play into time. But before we get into the film, I asked Virginia just to say a bit about herself and to describe a bit more than probably better than I could, about Between Waves. So, Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Actually, I think you described it really well. I was like, wow, you summed it up so well in one sentence. Because you're always like having to pitch this thing, right? So you're like, okay, what's my elevator pitch? That was excellent. I'd say, I guess also, it's also about loss and grief and dealing with all kinds of things. So yeah, you also said you wanted me to talk about how I got into directing.
Mhm.
Okay. So maybe I'll start with that. I got into the industry like over 20 years ago. Just I knew actually my first love was theater. So theater, I high school theater was I fell in love with theater. I just like the energy of it, the fun of performing, the the collaborative nature of it. And then I find film is very much like that. It's a different animal because there's more money in it, and you have to do it so much faster. With theater, you have time, which is lovely, and it's live. And with film, I mean, there's a different way of making it, but at the same time, it's that really fun collaborative scaffolding that happens with film that I just love. I'm so fortunate to be able to do that. So yeah, and I started off, I did, I was assistant directing, I was coordinating, I was doing whatever I could to learn the industry and learn how everything works. Because I think that's really important for a director when I'm on set to really know what everyone else, what their jobs are, and how I can, what I can ask for and what needs to happen. And so, so the other thing is that I'm always learning, which is really awesome about directing, because everybody in the field is an expert in it, so they know things, things are changing all the time too, right? Like, so they know things, and when I work with good professionals, I'm always learning. I'm always like, there's always something new to be discovered. And so that's so exciting for me.
Hmm. So why did you make the change from theater to film? How come you didn't stay into like doing like stage productions and directing like stage plays?
Uh, it, I went to my first year of university I was in theater, and then I got out of the program, not because of film. I just there was like different interests that I had at the time. So I actually went into mass communications and politics, and did, it was good. It was great because it opens up my mind and it makes me think about, I'm critical about the stuff I'm making and thinking of what I'm putting out there, and the stories that I want to tell, and how I portray, because you are making, a mark on, you're making a mark in the world, and I'm very conscious of that. But yeah, and then I actually took some film classes as part of my mass communications major, and it was towards the end of my BA, and that's when I had that eureka moment. Because I floated around. I did, like, one point I majored in classical studies, which was really awesome and beautiful and wonderful, but I realized I had to learn like a dead language, like a Latin or Greek, and I'm like, I don't think an ancient Greek too, right? Like not current Greek, but I was like, I just don't want to do that. So so yeah, I floated around a lot, and then when I took some film classes, that's when I had my eureka moment, and I was like, this is so amazing because of the visual element and sound and all those things, putting it together and telling a story that way. And as a kid, my dad, back to my grandfather had a photo studio.
Mm.
back in the former USSR and Belarus. So I kind of come from a family of image makers. And when I was a kid, my dad had an enlarger, and we would go into the bathroom, because we lived in a small apartment. We would go into the bathroom. He'd put on a red light. We had an enlarger and the tubs of developing the photos, and I would just watch the images. I have such fond memories of just, I guess, smelling the chemicals and and watching those images develop. And then we had a long hallway, and he had strung up, we had whatever, a clothing string and clothes clip and clips, and the pictures would hang drying, and I would walk up and down the hallway and look at images. So and then he also had an 8mm camera. So not Super 8mm, the one that you wind with your hand.
Up. Okay, yeah.
and black and white, and he would film things, and we would watch them projected on the wall in our living room. So I've always, that was just a part of my childhood. So I think just watching images and watching beautiful images develop and come to life. So it's always been something that I've admired, or I've have come into my into my psyche as so discovering that in university, I just went, oh my God. But I also didn't have any more money to stay, to continue studying film. So I decided I was just going to make go out in the field and make that my film school. And then later on, I did go to the Canadian Film Center and did my director's residency there. So, and I've done the A Woman in the Director Chair directing program. So I've since, continued my schooling. I'm always reading books, always just, always doing workshops. I did a really amazing workshop with Judith. Wow, can't remember her. Oh my God, what am I doing? Okay, I will go back to that name. But anyways, so she's directing actors. So I do things. Plus, I think the set is my greatest film school as I continue to direct.
Yeah, I think because you said that you did political science and that kind of stuff. I think that actually doing different subjects apart from film studies actually helps directors, and I think it helps with anything. If you broaden basically your horizons, and then just study different subjects, that helps you to understand not only filmmaking better, but I guess also the politics of filmmaking, because when a lot of people we don't really think about there's politics behind filmmaking. You have to be able to pitch your story, you have to be able to pitch it to investors and to studios, and if you're trying to get it platformed, you have to be able to know how to get your story sold. And it's all about art, but then it's also about the not so artistic part of it. So I guess doing politics and studying those kind of things really do actually help, and I think are kind of necessary. Not that you have to, because there's many people that they start out in one career and start out doing something else, but those kind of experiences do help.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And it's interesting, a lot of people that actually work in the film industry didn't necessarily study film in school. There's a lot of just artists that, because it's a seasonal industry, that come in, make some cash, go out. There's, before people would also people that just like to travel, things like that, adventure seekers, and people that love the circus, because it's a traveling circus where you get it's a certain kind of energy and vibe that people, I think it's, in the good old days, it would be people that liked the traveling circus, because you're always moving, you're always relocating. There's always something, so you have to be kind of very flexible. So, but it's also, there's always an adventure. There's always something.
Yeah, because I think especially in like North America, because like you have like so much of the film industry is centered around Toronto, but then there's also Vancouver, but you have to move to like different provinces if you're, especially if you're, I think if you're probably working on TV shows, like you have to move to like different provinces to film and then do like, like production and then come back to your home center and then just like move. So it is kind of, I guess I never thought of it that way, but it is kind of like a traveling circus. So you got to pack all everything up and cart yourself to a whole completely different town or city and just be like settle there, shoot, and then come back home and then just like unpack everything and then just like go through your editing and your post production and everything.
So I am not at that level yet. I have yet to get to that level where I'm being flown all over Canada, or the world. But I do go to Hamilton a lot of because there's a tax credit that an extra tax credit that lower, but well, depending on the budget, it seems to be. Well, it's not true because there's Umbrella Academy. There's some big shows that shoot in Hamilton, but like the sort of level of director for hire work that I'm doing right now, which is movie of the weeks, is all of that is shot in Hamilton. So I get put up in a hotel for the days we're shooting, but I drive home on the weekends to Toronto. But I also, what I meant by traveling circus is that you're always like there's not a lot of studios or backlots in Toronto. So regardless, like it's all about locations, and you're all the time moving this whole unit of trucks, and it is a circus. Like every some shows you're like every day or every second day, pack everything up, move to the next location, unload everything. It's the movie business. It's you movie this over here and movie that over there. I've heard people say that before.
Yeah, no, it's true because one thing, like one of the things I love about Toronto is you can go downtown, specific areas of downtown, you see those white trucks. And from the moment you see those white trucks, you know immediately, okay, something is filming down here. And so this is just fun trying to guess what it is that's being filmed. But then it's so interesting just watching how, like, when we watch films, especially those set in America, like it's fun as like a Canadian, like living here, just be like, I know that street. I
Oh,
know.
absolutely, yeah.
And it's just like I may have walked down there while they were filming. Like one of my favorite things is like, especially when Suits was filming here, when Suits was being produced in Toronto, like you see like the site, like that's the CBC building, and but it's kind of but then as a pedestrian, you're just thinking, oh, this is fun, like like there's something being made here. But then sometimes we don't think about like the below the line workers. That's sometimes become more conscious of recently. Like I just think of like all the packing up these guys have to do, like just like unloading all of these trucks, the cables. Oh, there's so many cables that you that port of these trucks.
And they're heavy. They're heavy.
They are. I've done a few set visits, and it's just like it's so much work goes into producing films and TV shows. I'm always appreciative of whenever I visit, I always try to make sure that I thank the crew and not just the people that visit, because I'm just like, you guys are working so hard, and we just come in here just to like talk to the actors or to the directors and directors. I'm like, I'm thanking you too, especially you, a crafts person, for your yummy food.
Oh yeah, no, it's a very there is so much work, and the like I think the really, like you said, like the fun creative jobs are like more at the top of this structure
Yeah.
of the and then there's just a lot of work, and it doesn't it's very fast moving, because if you're waiting for somebody, then that's time that's ticking, and that's costing money, because it's such a so you're always, there's never enough time.
Mhm.
You're always like, okay, like what's you always, as a director, you always have to be like way ahead of what you're going to do next. So as soon as you do a shot, and as soon as you say cut, you got to say the next thing you're doing. So you have to be, it's like a chess game. I mean, I love it. But you're always like, in your head, in your planning, you're always like 5 steps ahead. It's like, okay, when we get this and that's going to be the next thing. Can we go there? Can we pre-light it? How can we get ahead of ourselves? there's always, it's like a game. What can we do? Because I don't think it matters how much money you have. There's always a finite amount of time and what you could do. Although it'd be nice to have more time. I would love that.
Sure. And you mentioned that you're not a globetrotting director as yet, but I think this is also a perfect way to start talking about the film because Between the Waves is set between Toronto and San Miguel in the Azores. So you have traveled to direct, and for your first feature film, I think that's very impressive. So just tell me about this film because I read that that you came up with the idea for it about 10 years ago, when you were in San Miguel. So just tell me about this story about of time and alternate dimensions and decisions and grief and love and all of these things.
No, yes. Yes, it's called Between Waves, so it's not between the waves, but just.
Oh, I said the waves.
Yeah,
sorry.
It's fine. For a while, I was like, should we have just called it Between the Waves? Because it's just between waves, everyone gets mixed up. Yeah, it's San Miguel. So San Miguel is an island that my husband's father's side of the family is from. So his parents are there. They go there. And when we had my second child, we started visiting San Miguel. Like we visited it, and the first time I went there, as you've seen, if you've seen the movie, it's just beautiful. Stunning. It is so stunning. So and the light quality, because it's close to the equator, it's different there. And I was just like completely, fell in love with the island. I'm completely in love with that island for many, many reasons. The people there are fantastic. The island itself is so beautiful. And personally myself, like sort of in my own journey, I found it very healing. I found it healing because it was both. Because it's got such a temperate weather. It's got, in one day you could go from, a thunderstorm or like, crazy rain that's going sideways to, full sunshine and this beautiful day and this really tumultuous weather that, and this whole island, like it's got like these crazy waves, but it's got these beautiful, spaces that open up and it's just, it's amazing. It has 3 volcanic volcanoes that have erupted, but a long time ago, like in the 1600s and stuff. So it's very lush, the soil.
Yeah.
It's almost like in some places it feels like a tropical forest.
It does look like that because it's very green and blue. Because I was looking at pictures, and it's very green and blue. But then when you look at it, it does kind of suit a story about I guess you could say not only just I would say alternate realities, but just like a fantastical story because like I can imagine films being done there about like fairies or something kind of like a Lord of the Rings kind of situation. I'm surprised that Star Wars has never filmed there actually, but you know what I mean. It kind of does have that quality of like you can picture people not of this earth existing there and like time traveling. Like I think like using water I think as a conduit actually makes so much sense because like earth, when you talk about earth, like water is one of the strongest elements, if not the strongest, because like it erodes things over time. It can like make its own way. Like I was telling another director this, like actually, because like back home I'm from Earth, we have a saying that say the sea always finds its way back home. And then we also
nice.
And then there's one we always say like the sea will always reclaim the land. Like no matter what humans do, like the sea would always find a way to reclaim the land. So like when you center stories around water, like to me it always makes sense because like water is like it's simple. It's just H2O. It's just 3 molecules, but it's so strong and it's so present in our lives.
Absolutely. And the way, which isn't, I mean, this is in our sort of how we looked at this film is Jamie is water and Isaac is fire. And when they come together, that rust that's created, that blue-orange rust, That's so so in painting, like even in the paintings between them as they dance, it's that rust between them. And so there's a lot of the color schemes and stuff, that things around her were blue, and things around him had that orange and red kind of fire. And so their relationship, they're attracted to each other, but is also corrosive, and that kind of rust. And the colors when they're underwater and coming together, the light, we lit the water we panned off red and blue lights off the water.
No, see, I thought I was tripping because when you first you mentioned a lot of things around her blue, so I thought I was tripping because I was like, is it just me, or are a lot of people wearing like blue sweaters and blue jackets? So I wasn't just like imagining that, like you purposely made it so that a lot of, especially the background cast and actors, like wore a lot of blue, right?
I'm trying to think if she wore a lot of blue, but there was a lot of blue around her. So there's blue. There's definitely that was her colors and her palette, and then his palette was more to the reds and oranges. And although he wore a sweatshirt a lot, so that was blue actually when I think about it. But we sort of focused there, so we kind of looked at those colors as he has a red bike, like things like that, like the colors in their lives. But also the other thing about water is, at the same, Jamie is water, but she's also afraid of water.
Yeah.
So she's afraid of herself. And in the end, at the very, very end, she embraces the water.
Right, because like for her, like this, like you mentioned before, like the film is about it's about love, but it's also about grief and the loss of love, because like there's a traumatic event with her mom. And to me, like I think one of the opening shots is this: there's a scene with her and Isaac in a bathtub, and because I'm not gonna spoil it exactly, but because of what happens with her mom, I was thinking, oh wait, I'm surprised that she isn't afraid. She's afraid of open bodies of water, but she's not afraid of the bathtub. But then I was thinking, okay, she's probably not afraid because she had like, we have those scenes with her and Isaac, and this is like a place of comfort for her. But then the film is about how grief like can cause us to like lose touch with ourselves and lose touch with reality, because you're thinking, is this the grief affecting her? But then there's also something like, girl, you need to start taking these benzo pills because they're tripping you up and messing with your mind. So I want to talk about that because because like grief does affect us psychologically and emotionally, but then there's also these things like taking her these pills, and I just thought I was like thinking, okay, it's because by the end I was wondering, is all of this just a huge hallucination from her taking all these pills? It's not. But I wanted to talk about adding in that aspect of the film, because I kind of say almost like a red herring about for the story, because she's taking these benzo pills kind of like recreationally, and it's kind of like discussed very casually because she's a photographer and she works in the fashion industry and advertising industry, and that you just hint that these kind of things is commonplace in that industry. And then but you're thinking, okay, so is it like these pills that are affecting her? So I just thought it was a really nice way to kind of like throw the audience off of the story till we start to unravel it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted it the whole time. I wanted to put the audience in a place where they're not sure about what's going on, what's real, what's not. And so basically I wanted to take the audience on this journey where they're experiencing what Jamie's experiencing. Because it's what I've seen as an observer of mental illness. Like I haven't experienced it myself, but I have experienced people who are close to me going through some episodes of where they lose touch with reality, and to them it's absolutely real. Mm-hmm. It's like their brain can't distinguish, but then it also makes you think, well, hold on, what is real? It's only our brain interpreting everything. Like we interpret touch, we interpret, our eyes interpret what we're seeing. It's just it's the waves, it's light waves hitting things and coming back to us, right? So everything is interpreted through our brain. And when somebody interprets things differently, are they actually wrong in their interpretation, or are they seeing some kind of a different reality?
When we talk about reality, like we're always talking from a place of what we were taught reality is, right? Like, we're taught this is blue and like this is red, and like there's this philosophy question where if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? And then you're telling yourself, well, technically it doesn't make a sound because sound is only perceived if there's an ear there to hear it. But then I remember I was having this discussion with my friend, this was like years ago, and I used to work as a barista, and it was like, well, it does still make it. She was like, no, it doesn't make a sound because there's no one there. Well, I'm like, there's animals there and they can hear it, so therefore it still does make a sound. And it was like, yeah, this whole big huge discussion. But it's about that, it's about like what is up, what is down. Like we're up now because we know that gravity forces us down, but we're pointing up. But on the other side of the world, they're like we are down and they're up, right? And so it's all about it's all like it's all about perception. Is how you see things. And when you're talking about grief, I think is especially interesting is because like what I noticed with like some of the characters, like they didn't it's like they weren't considering Jamie's grief, and like they were expecting her to just keep going on as normal. And for me, I'm thinking, well, she's grieving this person, she's lost someone very close to her, like she won't be reacting to things normally. And like I just thought it was like, is no one even going to even mention the word grief? And which I thought was interesting. It's never, the word grief is never mentioned in the film.
That's true. It's not. I mean, Renata is the one that like says, you're, I think she's the one that points out, you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you need to, you're not, like she sort of points that out. But you're right. And I think that sometimes like I've experienced it where people are like, okay, you've grieved. Now it's been it's been a month or something. Like, why aren't you, let's go have some fun now. Like they don't want to see you in that. It's uncomfortable to see you in that place. So they are like, well, you're not fun anymore. What's going on? Right. So there's a little bit of people. It's really, I think people grieve in different ways. And so it's really hard to and you grieve in stages, right? Like it's not all at once. Like, so yeah, I think there was a point in my life where I lost both my father and my grandfather. And I was very close with my grandmother, who I was really close with. And it was all in the span of 6 months. And then, and then I lost some good friends. So in a different way, like I like my father and grandmother passed away. And it was a point in my life, like where, up until then, I've never experienced grief. And then all of a sudden there was this thing where I realized that people, like I became way more compassionate, because it made me realize, like, everybody sometimes, like, I don't know if somebody's going through what they're going through. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that, grief and hardship are things that everybody goes through, no matter where they are. And it's just part of life. It's just something we so rarely discuss, like, and there's this thing where they're like, oh, don't bring a child to a funeral. And there's I don't know, there's a lot of things, don't talk to children about death. And not just children, like people, they're like, they shy away from it or shy. And it's just, this is just an inevitable part of our lives. And I think it's the thing that we all, it's the thing that unites us as humans, right? It's something we all have in common. So I didn't want to shy away from it. I wanted to explore it, but have her, because she does kind of hide that from everybody else, right? So have her, be in this bubble where she's she has nobody else, so she sort of caves in on herself.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, like talking about grief, like you mentioned, like people don't want to talk about grief to like kids, but I just said that I'm thinking like, but that's not my culture, and like because
That's good.
I'm from the Caribbean and in Barbados, like we talk about death, like we take kids to funerals. Like I've never been to a funeral where a child hasn't been allowed to go. Like if they don't want to go, like you don't force them, but like if they're comfortable, like you go, like you have like kids at the graveside. Like one of the first funerals that I can recall going to was of a child, because like from in primary school, one of my best friends in primary school, like he died, and some of his siblings died. They died in a fire, and like it was the whole church was full of like students, right? And like they talked about death, and they talked about grief in the thing. I remember that funeral very clearly. And like we went to the gravesite, and this is just a part of our culture. And but what I find for North Americans have this thing where they want to shield kids from death. I'm like, but like, as we said, death is inevitable. It's a part of life, and like not teaching kids or not teaching people how to see grief, how to like talk about death from early, I think causes a lot of problems when we're adults, because then first you don't sometimes recognize what grief is, and then like as we like we like is as is shown in the film, like people are uncomfortable with it. They're uncomfortable with people grieving, and they're uncomfortable with people expressing their grief, and uncomfortable with people missing others. So they're like, okay, and unless it's them grieving, like they want the person grieving to move on. They're like, okay, this person died a week ago. Let's like, like we had the funeral. Like once we have the funeral, you should be able to move on. But that's not it. That's just one step. Like we have like the wakes that after the funeral you come back and you go to the house, and you have food, and like you're laughing, and like you like it's not like always a somber event, and sometimes it's very dramatic, because like, you can have some family drama take place at funerals. Like it can be like a show, but it's just like we accept this is thing, and then like you don't stop missing someone. Like my grandmother died, I think this is probably going on 15, 16 years ago, and like I still sometimes hear her voice. I still smell things that remind me of her. Sometimes I can still recall the smell of her perfume. And like there's sometimes that you pick up that phone, you suddenly the phone rings, and I still sometimes expect her to be Carolyn, or a little girl as she called me on the other side of the phone. And like you never really stop grieving, because like once you remember that that person is gone, like there's that moment of just like they're gone. And it doesn't even have to be death, that you mentioned, like friends, that you can grieve the loss of a friend, you can grieve like the loss of a relationship, like someone. Like one of the most devastating events in my life is when I broke up with a friend, and I'm like, oh wait, no, this is like terrible, right? And like and like you grieve these things, and like and I think about something the film explores is like it can take time, and grief, as we said, for everyone is different. Everyone can't be expected to grieve the same way, because we all have different relationships with different people.
Absolutely. I think that's so well described and put. You're absolutely right. It's so individual. Yeah, and it doesn't like end in a day or whatever. Like I agree. Like the people that I've lost, I still there's something will happen, and I'm like, oh, I grieve that they're not in my life. So yeah, so that was really well put. And yeah, and I'm actually originally not from North America. I'm from Eastern Europe, from Belarus, from the former USSR. But there is that culture there as well of don't bring children to funerals, don't talk about death in front of children. So I feel like until my mid-20s, when this all happened to me, I was completely oblivious to grief, and to like that bubble of pretend this is never going to happen, or let's try to shield the child. I don't think it's a healthy, like I talk with my children about death and about loss, and I actually I'm trying to remember if there's recently, but I have brought them to funerals, and I think it's important that they know it's going to happen to inevitably to all of us. And also I found myself, I became a lot more compassionate, understanding that you never know what somebody is going through. Because on the outside they could seem you know, you put your face up, and it's funny, in North America also, you're like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. Everyone's great.
And on the inside, you're like, no, I'm not. I'm falling apart to pieces.
Yeah. And sometimes it's okay. I think like if we become, and maybe with COVID, I think people have become a little bit more compassionate and open, to say like, no, I'm having an awful day. I've been home all day, and, I haven't seen anybody. And it's like, I'm starting to talk to people more about those things, and, feeling like you're mine, and also mental illness. Mm-hmm. And that's a taboo subject. There's another taboo subject, where everyone's, it's like other illnesses you could talk about, but mental illness. Although it's funny, in my culture, like they won't even say the word cancer.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because like if you say it, somehow escaping your lips will, I don't know, it's weird. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah.
Humans, we're so complex, but there's some things about us that are so simple. Like it sounds like a cliche, but when we were talking, and I think it plays into the film really well, is like the inevitability of death. Like, it's just like one of those things, especially I think if you grew up in a culture where religion is a very big part of it. Like, you talk about eternity, and you're just like thinking the inevitability of eternity itself, like, gives me a headache. I've stopped thinking about the concept of eternity. Years ago, that was legit. I was in the car one day with my mom. I just started thinking about the concept of eternity, and just the concept, like the film like talks about parallel universes, and like how much multiple universes. And it was just, I was like, Carolyn, we're gonna stop thinking about this, because I was getting an actual head. I was like, this hurts my head. I cannot think about the concept of eternity. It blows my mind. I'm gonna think like, let's think like 50,000 years in the future. That's my limit. I'm not gonna go past or whatever amount of light years, whatever. But then the film, like you talk about, it's because like for Isaac, played by Robinson, he's a theoretical physicist, and his whole thing is about time convergence and about multiple universes. And I think it kind of plays into the theory of how you tie it into grief as well, because you're thinking, because of every decision that we make leads to an alternate reality. Like, if I made a decision to go left, I've changed the course of my life, and I don't know what going right would have ever done. But this film is about, okay, so you make the decision to go left, and then like one of your alternate versions of you makes the decision to go right, and you kind of like converge at the same time. And it kind of ties in a grief too, where it's like, if you hadn't made this decision, it would not have led to a moment of grief for you. And that's kind of where Jamie is. She's like, and that's kind of a path that she's taking. You don't realize it till the very end, where she's like, has guilt about a specific decision that she made. And so she's trying to come to terms with the decision that she made played a part in this event, this traumatic event in her life. So I want us to talk a bit about using alternate timelines as a way to discuss grief, and a way to, I guess, kind of accept grief, because it's not explicitly said in the film, but I think that's what it is. It's about the discussion of alternate realities, is about how we move through life, how we have to learn to accept the consequences of our actions.
Absolutely. And part of it is like also about choice. Mm-hmm. and being in the choices that we make leading to different paths. Like, for example, if 5 years ago Jamie and Isaac went to upstairs to his place when they first met, maybe there would have been a timeline where they already had a child that they went to the Azores with. So all Jamie is stuck in this place where she has to make a decision. So in a way, being caught between these timelines is her like looking at all these decisions that she's made, and the consequences of them, and how that's impacting her. But also, I guess this is going to be a spoiler.
You can spoil as much as you want, and then I
Yeah.
will go from there. Because I was like, you know what? Normally I would go through like spoilers for these interviews, but this film ends in such a very interesting way. I'm like, I don't want to spoil too much, but whatever you feel comfortable with, I will follow your lead.
There's no other way of saying unless it's a spoiler. There's no other way of talking about this. But in the end, she has to. So, I want Jamie to persevere, right, and I want her to move forward. I didn't want to leave her in a place where she was stuck. Although at the end, comes into question as well. But her way of reconciling what happened is to perhaps, and this is a question, is to blame it on the other Isaac.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how she can go on.
Right. Because I was questioning if that was even real. I'm like, was he even really there? Because again, with the alternate reality, like what she sees isn't what everyone sees. Like she's only because the whole theory is like, and this is something I don't think I've ever seen even if you're talking about something like Star Trek, Star Wars, or whatever, they're talking about or other sci-fi films and shows where they're talking about alternate realities and converging. Like other people are always able to see the other alternate that arrives, and then that's how like they're not allowed to because like the theory is that you can't have two or more versions of you existing in the same space at the same time, because then that creates like a whole time shift, a whole time flux and all that. But the thing is, like I always remember like other characters will be able to see these beings from alternate realities existing, whereas if in your film, like they don't, like you don't see them. The only person that can see them is Jamie, which I think is interesting because it's like, again, it's like all of this in her head is like, or is like she having this really vivid hallucination. It has her grief like stressed her out to the point so much where she's like able to conjure up all these multiple versions of herself and all these multiple versions of Isaac, because this is what she wished would have happened. Because as you mentioned, like she's thinking about the consequence, like could she have had a kid by now? Would they be in like would they have been living in the air source all I know, would they have been happier? And I saw this as, I kind of saw it as her, these are like her imaginings of what she wishes their life could have been.
And I wanted it to be like that. That was very intentional, because I wanted the audience like her to never really fully know. So I wanted always to keep both. Like there's people that finish the film and go, oh, she's crazy, or oh, like she was really time traveling, and multidimensional traveling, and I just never wanted. I wanted it to be like that. I wanted to. It's like I said, I kind of wanted to give that experience of somebody who the way I've interpreted, or the way I've seen of somebody who's going through of like sort of like a mental illness situation where their reality, or what their interpretation of reality is, completely real to them. So and whether it is or isn't, it doesn't matter in the end, because this is what they're experiencing. So I kind of I wanted to continue that. I wanted to make sure that throughout the story, you could always see the story as one or the other. So there was never, any time. It's like this idea of particles existing in two places at the same time, which they've now proven happens when they accelerate them enough and then smash them into each other. So it's her existing, like vibrating in two places at the same time. And who's to say that somebody who's got a different, who's on a different wavelength in their minds, or is interpreting something in their minds differently, isn't somehow getting a privileged perspective. So
I actually love that phrase that you use in the film, a privileged perspective, because it's about you're being able to see something else that no one else has the opportunity to see, and it's a privilege because you're looking in, you're seeing things from a completely different perspective that no one else on earth is having at that moment. You're seeing something that no one else can even possibly comprehend or understand. So there's a privilege. I love that term, privileged perspective. And I want to actually take that into how you actually transition the shots, because the way you do your editing in this film is very interesting. Like there are certain things I realized, like pouring liquids is used as a transition, and like music as a cue for transition from scenes and light. And there's one, I think one of the more fascinating ones is like she's standing at the graveside and she in her hand she's holding, it looks like water, like black water, right? And it's like, this is black liquid. I'm like, did she cut her hand? Is it blood? But I'm like, no, it's not blood, it's just black and dirt. And then like the next shot, she's in the shower and it's dirt. So I want to ask you about that scene in particular. I'm like, exact. So that's what made me think. I'm like, wait, hold on. Did she actually travel to like an alternate dimension? Because I'm like, why is this black liquid in her hand at the graveside, but why is there dirt in her hand at the in the shower too? Because I'm like, there's no way. Like how? Like that scene had me good. I'm like, okay, wait. So what happened? What is in her hand at the grave?
Oh, it's dirt, but she squeezes it so hard it becomes liquid.
Wow. Okay. Because I was wondering.
Yeah.
Like, how?
But well, technically what it was really wet dirt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the idea is that like her holding on to it is her holding on to her grief.
Yeah.
And not wanting to let go of it.
Mm.
And she holds on to it, like, you know, because Mark says you haven't answered my call in days.
Yeah.
So she's maybe for days has held on to this, and it's that dark grief in her life.
Mm.
That's what symbolically I think it's that. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that you saw it as like a traveling dimension thing, but that's cool. It's kind of fun. People see different things in this, and I welcome that. I welcome all the interpretations and all the perspectives.
I was like, that part. That scene was really interesting. I love like the transition for us. Could you just tell me a bit about your editing and also the music used for the film?
Yeah. So the editing, but also it was the cinematography. So that we planned. It was very specific. You know, and we had to go. So one story goes backwards in time, which is the history. Then there's a story that goes forwards in time, and then there's the event that keeps on coming into the story,
right?
Which you also see in clips. You know, and so there's a whole bunch of different stories that are overlapping. And you know, and then there's a story of sort of, you know, this, you know, so visually thinking of how we were going to transition, and then there's also transitioning from Toronto to the Azores, right? There's like you know, so we had to really think about how these transitions were going to happen. So yes, the pouring, like she pours the wine in the sand, and you know, it's like people do that traditionally, like over a graveyard or something, or over a grave of a person, and then, you know, and then I knew that was something I planned with the cinematographer, that we were going to cut into the pouring of the wine in a memory from the past. We do a transition on the gear shift.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, so those were planned. Some transitions were found in editing. Oh yeah, one of my favorite transitions, and nobody, is the opening of the fridge. So the detective, she opens up
the food.
She opens up the fridge in Toronto, and then we cut to Renata opening up the fridge, and there's actually a small dissolve in there. And that was it was always in the plan. And then we get to the Azores, and the fridge opens up the other way. We're like, shit, what are we gonna do? You can't, and the door, you can't move that door or anything. So we shot it, and then when we got to Toronto, flipped it in post, flipped it in editing, flipped the shot. So then they both, but until we actually got to Toronto, we didn't know if it was going to cut. So it was one of those things where it's a lovely transition that I'm so excited by that it worked, and it was me, the editor, and the cinematographer, the ones that really were like, yay! Like, I just remember after the film, Jason Webb, the cinematographer, came up to me and said, the director of photography, he said to me, oh my God, it worked. I was like, yeah, it worked. I can't believe it. Yeah, but some transitions, like the shower with the at the gravesite, that was something we found in editing. Verily, I had such talented and amazing collaborators on this film. Jeremy Chalin-Ryu is the editor, and he just did such a spectacular job. And there's so many things that we found. We retold the story in editing, and then with the composition. Steve Kracklow is a composer, and he. It's funny. I saw him for the screening recently, and he said to me, "Do you remember what you gave me? You gave me an image." And he goes, and I was like, "I don't remember." He said, "Yeah." He said, "You gave me this rust image of this." And he said, and that just informed the sound. But yeah, and then also there's a lot of really beautiful things that happened with sound design, and sound design became part of the composition and score, where sounds like the sound of the waves bleeds into the composition, and her yelling bleeds into the music, into the, and so that was like the sound designer Kaylee Melito, sound editor, she would send files, she would send her stuff to the composer, and they would send things back and forth, and so there was that kind of interaction. And then there's also something really wonderful that happens in a sound mix when you have an amazing sound mixer like we did. We had two really awesome sound mixers, and they blended and mixed and transitioned, and like you said, like pre-lapped the music or post-lapped it, and brought it through, and then just also layered it with sound. There's a lot of sound of the waves, like the sound of the waves that gets layered into the door slamming.
Right, because I think like we talk about Griffin and all that, but I think the sound design plays a very, very big role in this film, because like when you think about waves, like waves kind of like once, like they converge onto the shore, so it's like the water mixing with the earth. But it's kind of like the editing for this film is kind of the same, especially the music, because there's one scene that I thought was really interesting, and is like how the music blends in, but then they also it also matches the transitions of the scenes, because there's this scene where there's this folk singer singing a Portuguese song in the tavern, and the way how it transitions to another singer, but it's a more contemporary artist singing a more contemporary song. And I thought I was like that was so well done, where they picked exactly where to have the two songs meet up at the same time. But that was really great. So I love how like those little moments play a part, not only in the song, but they also match the transitions of the scenes at the same time. Because where the contemporary singer comes in, that takes place in Toronto. So you have like a contemporary song fitting a city, whereas you have the folk singer singing, in San Miguel, in like in this tavern that has a very old feel and very, a more historic feel.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful transition, and that was all done with in the edit and the mix. So that's an example of, because it's both there. That's not composition; those are both two original songs that were blended. There's a visual blending that happens because we sort of fade into and dissolve into the player, the record player. So again, like planned transitions in the visual sense, but and then in editing. But then there's that mix that happened. That was a sound mix. So that's way it, like that happens at the end of the whole process, where you go into a studio and you mix all the things, the dialogue, the sound effects, and the music. like both both composed music and then also original songs.
Right.
It's truly it's a good mixer is a truly an artist, like where I've had, you know, I think so many good people came in around this project, and like maybe you'll appreciate this, because you did talk about your grandmother and feeling her spirit. I felt like my dad's spirit was watching over this project.
No.
Yeah, I totally did, because we had so little money, we had so little of anything, but such good energy and such good people came around it, and so many good things happened around this project. I really felt like my dad was watching over it.
Right.
So
Because you're like, oh, everything worked out exactly the way I wanted it to be.
and so like sometimes more than what I imagined, which that's the really exciting thing. Like there's something in your head, and then when you have so many wonderful creative individuals come together, and that scaffolding thing that I love, when it gets scaffolded to a higher level or a higher, like, it's like, wow, it's come together, and it's even more wonderful and beautiful. And I'm so proud of this film and what we achieved with it.
And we can't talk about collaborations and mixing and all this stuff without the mixing of your cast and your crew and your creative team, because like as your co-writer Catherine Andrews, like working with her, and then tell me about that, and then also finding your cast, because like you have Jamie, who's played by Fiona Graham, and Isaac, played by Luke Robinson, and like they work so well together. So just tell me about working with Catherine, and then assembling your cast and your crew.
Yeah, so Catherine is awesome. We're working on other projects together. We came together because a friend of mine, I said, oh, I'm looking for a writer, and she sent me some, she's like, oh, I think I know somebody, and we met up, and it was like, I felt like I've known her my whole life. She was just here. She's right now living in Copenhagen, but because her husband has some work there, but she'll be coming back to Toronto. But she was just visiting because we had the theatrical premiere of the film. So she came to Toronto and stayed with me, and we had such a lovely time together. But yeah, her and I. It took us about 2 years to write the story. I came to her with the story. I said, this is what I want to do, and I started working on it, and then we worked very with a lot of respect for each other's creativity, and that's really important when you collaborate. And then so we would we went through a lot, there was points where it was just like, let's just burn the script, it's not working. Right. Something I learned now, when you get to that place where you want to burn the script, if you can get through it, if you could figure out what it is that's not working and why you want to burn it, and get through that, then you can get to the other side of it where you are like, oh, now it's working. So I've learned that lesson. Anyways, so that was really awesome, the creative collaborative process with Catherine. And then the cast, such a wonderful cast, and I'm so grateful. Fiona was on the project earlier, and then Luke came in. He was from an audition process, but from day one, so open, so generous, so receptive, and both of them just really connected. We did some reading and stuff over Zoom, because Fiona lives in New York, and then she came into Toronto, and then we had not a lot of time to do some rehearsals and some workshopping and stuff. And I just saw how they connected, and they worked so well together, found each other, or found that their and then it's lovely the way like Fiona knew the character for a long time because she
Okay.
helped in the development of this of when we were writing and stuff. But Luke found the character, and he had more than one character he had to find.
Oh, okay. How do you mean?
Well, because there's multiple, so he had to like figure out the physicality because there's different versions,
Oh, okay.
right? So he had that added, you know, added obstacle. But he's like such a just this lovely, like open, welcoming person that and Fiona too, like just both of them so talented, so collaborative, and it was they were amazing to work with. Yeah.
No, everyone did a really good job because especially I think because as you said, like Luke had to find the character and like he does play essentially like different versions of the same person. So that is very different. And kind of like Fiona kind of had to do the same thing with Jamie because she's playing Jamie in grief and then she's playing Jamie out of grief and like they're two distinct people, like, you know, until like she starts to like get not I think accept her grief and realize that she has grief and she needs to go through because who she is at the beginning of the film is not who she is at the middle, and then it's not who she is at the end, right? So it's like when we think about performers, like they are essentially playing like different versions of these characters like at different stages and points of their life.
Yeah, I the more I work with performers, the more I'm like, so I bow down to them because they're the ones that come onto a set and they have to open their souls and their, you know, spirits to us, because otherwise, you know, they're you know, they just have to be so vulnerable and open. Otherwise we, you know, if they're closed, if they're in their heads, if they're not, you know, it's not gonna be a good performance. So something that I always say to performers, like, I am here for you, whatever you need. Because I look at myself, one of my jobs as a director is to just make a safe place for the performers on set. And it's safe, I mean, like not just like physical safety, but like a place where they could have fun, they could be open, they could, you know, like find this, you know, find those things. And I love playing with actors, like, you know, finding the scene. Like if you actually, I wish I always, whenever I'm filming, I'm like, I wish I had more time. I wish I had more time. But yeah, and like there's like a really awesome collaboration where if, you know, I never want them to know the drama and the, you know, anything that's going on from the traveling circus, because there's always something going on. But when they walk on set, I just want it to be like, this is theirs. This is, you know, this is their space now. This is their home or their whatever it is, their office, whatever it is, it's theirs now. And everybody else, like all the other things that are, you know, like you said, like all the, you know, all the other film things that are going on, they have to believe in this illusion that they're creating.
Yeah.
Because otherwise that's, you know, and in the end, that's all we're going to see. We're not going to see, you know, whatever all the people behind the scenes, like scurrying around and, you know, moving lights and stuff like that. We're going to see the essence of this is through the performers.
And I think this is a great way to end our interview.
Thank you.
Is because I think, like, not only talking about your film, but just film in general, like sometimes we do get caught up in the story, but then we also have to remember like all of these people are involved in bringing these stories together, and it's all about making everything work the way it's supposed to so that we get a full story. And like you have the performers, but then you have directors and writers and sound mixers and cinematographers and all the crew that works behind the scenes. And like using the analogy of the film, like it all has to work together, it all has to come together perfectly, like like time converging. I sound corny saying that, but I'll just say it. I'm gonna stay on theme and stay with the analogy. I'm gonna go push through it and say it anyway.
Oh, I had such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for talking with me. So one of the last question I want to ask you is for what's next for the film? Like, are there any other upcoming film festivals that is going to be showing? I think I saw in the press note that it's going to be available on some streaming platforms.
Yeah, so basically it's primarily now video on demand. So
Mm.
it's on Apple TV, the Cineplex store, it's on Rogers and other video on demand like Shaw and other video on demand platforms. Um, so it's very accessible. I hope people go out and take a look at it because you don't even have to leave your couch anymore.
Yeah. Stay home and stream it. And
Yeah.
and for your next film, are you gonna stay in kind of like the sci-fi genre, or are you gonna branch out to possibly something different, like action or thriller? What?
I still want to. I totally want to make a thriller. So happens to be, and it's just so, and it's not the only stories that I have or the only stories that I want to tell, but it so happens to be my next script that I'm working on is a sci-fi. Um, but that's just what happened to sort of emerge. I don't know how that is, but I've got other things that I'm developing and working on, and some show ideas and some yeah, I got some projects.
Yeah.
We'll see what gets made, but
Thank you so much for speaking with me
thank
today,
you.
Virginia. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you so much. Have an excellent day.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.